Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Eve Stern, Director of the Center for the Humanities, and I'm delighted to see so many people here today for this exciting event. This event forms part of the Center for the Humanities year-long series, Innovations in Storytelling, and has been organized and sponsored by the Department of Africana Studies. Before I forget, if you are a student in Professor McIntyre's class, there's a sign-up sheet at the front of the room, so don't forget to sign up before you leave today. So I am delighted to welcome Camille Weanquoi. Did I say that right? Weanquoi. Ms. Weanquoi is a distinguished choreographer, educator, and advocate for the arts. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Baltimore Black Dance Collective and co-founder and co-director of the Baltimore Black Choreographers Festival. Her expertise spans West African and contemporary African dance forms, modern dance, and sharing research and narratives rooted in the African American experience. She actively creates, performs, and instructs in African diasporic dance forms across the United States. Camille W. Dance and Company, the performance company that she founded and will be performing at URI at 7 o'clock tomorrow in the Fine Arts Center, so please come to that if you can. This company focuses on traditional and contemporary expressions rooted in the rich tapestry of the African diaspora. Their repertoire is marked by a dynamic blend of movements, rhythms, and narratives that pay homage to the ancestral and cultural heritage of the African diaspora. The company's endeavors extend beyond performances, offering specialized dance consulting services. Through this, the company aids in arts integration, program development, and culturally diverse dance education for educators, private studios, and community initiatives. Through these initiatives, Camille W. Dance and Company seeks to preserve and increase dance's artistic and educational value as a medium of cultural expression and learning. And if you have questions, I should mention at the end of the talk, we'll have time for questions and answers. This afternoon, Camille will speak to us about how to be a good ancestor, civically sound and rooted in community. Please join me in welcoming Camille to URI.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Lovely faces in the place. So, there is an African proverb that states, as you do for your ancestors, so will your children do for you. So, when we think about the context of how to be a good ancestor, we're thinking about it in the now, not when we're gone and we're past, but what happens now to define who we become and how they will honor us. So I want us to take a journey today. I'm a dancer, so this is not going to be your typical lecture. I'm not going to just talk at you. It's going to be a call and response situation happening. So are we on the same page in reference to that? Okay, so if there is a call, there is a response, always. When I was really considering the concept of this lecture, it really came from the concept of the show, The Way Forward. The Way Forward is a love letter to the women in my bloodline, the mamas, the aunties, the cousins, all of the people who had a part in mothering me along the way. And unfortunately, in 2020, one of my elders passed away. She was my great aunt. She was my grandmother's twin sister, the last of my elders on my mother's line. And I was devastated. During 2020, we all know what happened in March 2020. Literally, the world shut down. The world completely stopped. And in that moment, it was literally the last time I would see my elder. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye During that time, funerals weren't done the normal and traditional ways that we do. And the ways that we process and honor those who are becoming an ancestor shifted. And I had to really think about what did I get? Like, what did I miss? And it all started flooding in that moment. How this person now is my ancestor. And the things that I really wanted to know, I felt like that connection was severed. It was broken. So I started really writing down the questions and really trying to process how to tell her story. We are our greatest resources. So telling her story really meant that I had to tell my story. And as artists, our job is really to reflect the times. As Nina Simone has said, we all have to be actively engaged in telling the stories from our perspective. I'm a Black woman. My ancestors are Black women. And it felt like their stories were hidden. Their experiences were put on the shelf. And we just had to keep going. So the tie that I felt that was broken really was the fact that the storytelling was not continuing. So how do we honor that? How do we process that? And then how do we bring it forward? What is the way forward? So it really came to asking questions. The first line of defense when we're talking about storytelling is, what questions are you trying to unearth? What questions are you trying to explore? And for me, the questions were, who were they? Who am I in relation to them? Who will I now be in relation to the next generation? So as I really started to dive into it, I wanted to see, what did I gain from them? Even though I was so distraught and I'm feeling like I lost something, I really wanted to know what exactly it is that I gained. And boy, throughout this journey, it was a wealth of knowledge. I'm going to take this mic because I most certainly like to walk around. There we go. All right. So, what comes to mind in reference to how to be a good ancestor? The first thing is, who are your ancestors? That's the first question I had to ask in reference to really creating this lecture, in reference to creating this show. Who are they? Who are they is the first question. Write down their names. So I started processing their names first because oftentimes, as an African American specifically, growing up and being raised in this country, the connection to our bloodline is severed because of the transatlantic slave trade, because of the Jim Crow South, migration. Families were shifted. Families migrated north, south, west, east, and oftentimes changed their names. My maiden name is Lattimore, but it is Lactimore and it's Latimer. So there are so many variations and iterations of my last name that ties me to so many other people, but I first had to know the name. So when we're talking about the storytelling, who are the characters in your story? How do you name them? How do you claim them into the space, right? So I wanted to know, who are you? What are your names? So I started to do a little fact finding. Ancestry.com is the bomb.com. I don't know if y'all know that, right? I'm going to just say that. It's not free. However, it was an opportunity for me to go and dig into a family tree that I didn't have a lot of information about. I'm a northerner. I'm from the Bronx. That was most of what I knew. I knew my great grandparents. I knew my great grandparents. My grandparents come from North Carolina and South Carolina. But that was the extent to where I knew. But then as I started to research, I started finding names. It was Mildred. It was Margaret. It was Eve. It was Anne. And that really took me on this journey of asking questions and really trying to catalog, who are these characters in my story? What do they need to tell me? in order for me to pass them forward? What do I need to know in order for me to understand who I am? I started to really look at their occupations, which was another layer in and of itself. I found out my ancestors were educators. Some of them were artisans, um, lawyers, doctors. A lot of them were tilling the field. But it started with just one thing, the name, claiming the characters in your story, and then finding their backstory. That was the next layer. What did they do? Who were they in this lifetime, right? So I started to really question, what does that have to do with me? How did I fit now into this story? So it came from the idea of, well, how does our ancestry shape and mold identity? How does their journey show up in our journey? Where do we see similarities? Where do we see differences? And then how do we bring that forward? How does that shape how we are showing up in the world today? And then how can we be a good ancestor? In my spiritual practice, which is rooted in Ifa and Hoodoo, I am a person that believes and is subscribes to the fact that there is 7 generations that came before us, and there are 7 generations that come after us. And in terms of the 7 generations that came before us, they lay the groundwork. They lay the foundation, and then it comes to us who has to carry it forward for the next 7 generations. So what does that look like, right? And when we're talking about the story, how do you play a major role in that 7 generations coming after you? It's a question that I had to ponder. It's a question that every time I do a lecture or a presentation, a lot of my participants ponder, well, what does that have to do with being a good ancestor? Like it or not, one day, you all in the room will be the ancestors. So how are you showing up in your world today? What story are you telling? What foundation are you laying for the people coming after you? How can they find the research that they need on who you are? What tidbits are you leaving for them? So then I turned around and said, oh, well, that's it. That's their story. That's the research. That's what I need to find. I need to know who they are so that I can lay the groundwork for the next generation. So it really started with trying to figure out who they were, honoring my ancestor who passed away, and then trying to figure out how I contribute to the next generation. So let's begin with, what is an ancestor? Because quite honestly, everyone doesn't know what an ancestor is. And an ancestor in certain cultures and in certain demographics and spaces and places in the United States or beyond, an ancestor can mean various different things, right? An ancestor for me, in the simplest definition, is someone who is a part of your bloodline who has passed on. That also can mean someone who is a part of your community bloodline that has passed on. Oftentimes we separate community from our personal families, but I'm sure everyone here is a part of the URI community, correct? Right? So if one of us is gone, we're all going to honor that person. We're all going to remember who that person is in memory of pouring out to my homies. You know, we have these moments, right? But it's because we are connected in a way beyond what we know face to face. We all have a shared experience in this world. So when we talk about being a good ancestor, it really starts from that conversation of, what is an ancestor? Is it only restricted to somebody I'm related to? Or could it very well be someone who I share community with? And the both are very much true. Very, very much true. So diving into the ancestor, right? We're talking about, in the simplest form, I like to refer back to this wonderful movie that a lot of my children friends know, Coco. Have we heard about Coco? Remember me, oh, that life will get you down. Yes, Coco. If you haven't seen Coco, I'll give you a brief synopsis. The movie is really about this young boy who's going back and really trying to find who his ancestor was. He was connected to this one famous guitar player, and he really was believing that that's my ancestor, that's my ancestor. But on his journey, meeting the rest of his ancestors, he found out that he came from such a rich, cultural, wonderful, loving family that extended beyond just grandmother and grandfather. He had aunts, he had uncles, he had people in his neighborhood who were a part of his journey. But he realized if he didn't call their names and he didn't know their stories, it would fade away. So the same thing can be said here today. Who are your ancestors? How do we define them? What do they look like? What is their backstories? How can we connect to them? Now, let's flip it on to community. When we're talking about being a good ancestor in reference to community, we're talking about I am because you are because I am. It is the shared responsibility of being stewards of the planet, stewards of this earth, making sure that we prepare a space for each other to coexist. And it really goes back to the idea of storytelling. When we don't share who we are and we don't center ourselves in our stories, we often forget the humanity of other cultures. So it is our job as artists, writers, painters, actors, dancers to really honor the stories we're not hearing much of. So for me, I come from a Black woman, African diasporic perspective. I try to make sure that my stories are rooted in the African American traditions and cultures. They're rooted in the African diaspora because I don't hear much of them. So I try to make sure that I am telling the stories that are connecting to me, that really honor and uplift and humanize Black people as a culture, as a race within this space and this earth, so that when we have these shared conversations, it comes from a place of understanding and knowingness. Last night, when we had our sister chat, we had a lovely understanding that happened randomly between the conversation of a bracelet. Just a bracelet. Something as simple as a bracelet. But the conversation about a bracelet was a shared conversation. Even though each person was honoring and sharing their personal experiences with tradition in reference to wearing a bracelet, honoring culture, and uplifting by wearing this bracelet, being passed down from generation to generation, telling how it was a special gift from a grandparent, and realizing as they looked at each other, they both had that same experience from different cultures, receiving a bracelet from their grandparent. Realizing when we share our stories, we are interwoven in each other's lives. That broke open a perspective that people didn't understand, that we have a shared responsibility to each other, that we both experience pain, love, pleasure, heartbreak, joy, but from our lanes, but very much shared, very much intertwined, very much interwoven. So when we stop sharing our stories, we stop humanizing other people's cultures. We stop trying to listen to understand and just listen to listen and respond. So as a culture, as a people and as young generation in the room, I want to invite you to continue to share stories. Storytelling is the way that we can honor other perspectives, where we can root ourselves and our history and our culture within the space and be able to have a shared and understanding and perspective, but also open our eyes to maybe some similarities and differences so that we can talk about. So the way forward, as I stated before, is a journey of me having a self discovery and really using the art of storytelling to bring forth an otherworldly rites of passage journey for my young characters who are joining me in the journey to the ancestral realm. So I was thinking about how I bring these different perspectives of the storytelling, right? I have my grandmother's story, I have my story, but I also didn't think about the perspective of the youth, their story. They're the ones that came after these ancestors. They're the ones that now have to steward the world. So, what do they need in order to be able to carry us forward? And that was the story I didn't think about when I was creating this. And I had to think about it because, as I said, like it or not, one day we will all be ancestors. So, how do we prepare the next generation to take the mantle? How do we share our stories unapologetically, fully, and authentically so that our next generation can make the choices that they need to make, so that they can steward the earth in a way that is honorable, authentic, and honors where we need to go for our future. I'm a firm believer in listening to the youth because sometimes they have the message. Like it or not, I'm going to say it out loud. Listen to the youth because sometimes they have the message, but also prepare them. In our society, we tend to keep secrets. We tell what we're ready to tell, and what we're not ready to tell, we kind of hold it to our chest. So, in the reference to how are we rooting ourselves in community, how can we be civically sound? It's through authenticity, it's through storytelling. So, the layer of our youth in our story, the way forward, really had to be, well, what did they want to know? So I looked at my characters that I was developing, and their names are Lily and Gabby. At the time, they were 15 and 16 years old, and I really wanted to know, like, well, what do you know? How how can I share what's coming next if I don't actually know what you know now? Like, what can prepare you to take ownership of this world? And the conversation was amazing. It was, well, I don't know if I want to take over this world. I don't know if I'm equipped to do this. Why should I have to go to school to do this? It was a layer of conversations in reference to, well, I wish you would have told me this. Or I wish you would have been a little bit more clear on what direction I can take in this world. Instead of telling me to do, I wanted to know what perspectives I can take, what directions I can go in. How can I honor this space if I'm shutting down their voices? So, in telling my ancestor story, I had to remember it was important to tell the youth story too, because it's a seven generations going forward and a seven generations going back. But we tend to forget those two are on the same journey, whether it is seven generations forward for you youth that are in the room, or seven generations back for the ancestors that came before us. We're all on the same path. So, how do we merge the journeys? How do we tell the stories of the ancestors that came before us? And how do we bring them to connection with the soon to be ancestors that are coming after us? So, it really came down to asking them questions of what they wanted to know. what stuff was really held in by their parents, by their grandparents, that they had to discover at the last minute. Like, how can I be a woman? What is womanhood? What is manhood? How does one be a man? How does one be a woman? These were basic questions, but they were hard questions. And they really it took us to the place where we had an opportunity to have some authentic relationships and conversations because we were thinking about not centering ourselves. When you're working to be a good ancestor, you can't center yourself. It's not going to be about you because in 2050, I might not be here. So, how do I prepare the next generation who will be here to take ownership of this space? Instead of, it's my time, it's my time. No, how do we make sure it's our time? When we're thinking about being a good ancestor, it's never about the ego. It's never about, well, now in 2025, this election is coming up. And how do we prepare ourselves for 2050, 2070? We have to take ourselves out of the equation and honor and center the stories of what's to come or what has yet to come. So you're building your story of without even knowing the plan, essentially. Yes, you have the storytelling of the things that came before you, but you don't know what the story is going to be after you leave here. So how do we make that story a reality? How do we honor it in this very moment in 2024? How can we build for what's to come if we don't know it and we can't see it? And it's not something that's tangible right now. So for my college students who are in the space, you're just thinking about getting through day to day. There's no, absolutely not. Kids, children, what are you talking about? What, grandparents? Are you serious? No, you're not thinking about it in that term, right? That's the farthest thing from your mind. I see some head shaking. Yeah, it's the farthest thing from your mind. It's not something that's in your space, right? But if we're going to be civically sound and rooted in community, it actually has to be in our mind. It has to be in the forefront of what we are thinking about today. What stories will we tell? What stories will they tell? What stories will they honor? What things will they leave behind because it's not necessary to bring forward? So the way forward is really going to be unearthing what that looks like. Deciding to take ourselves out of the box and usher in whatever comes, good, bad, or indifferent, with authenticity, transparency, and a little bit of tough love. Because some of these stories that we're telling of our ancestors aren't very pleasant. They feel hard because some of our ancestors experienced some hard truths that they didn't want to share with us. But in order for us to be rooted in community and civically sound, we're going to share those stories. We're going to have to share them. So, how do we share them? Through the joy, the pain, the hurt. How do we share them? For me, in this process, it really was a call their names and center what they experienced. So as we went through it with Gabby and Lily, our young ones of the cast and our young ones of the story, and them asking, well, how come you you're not always joyous? How come grandma experienced this pain and never talked about it? We had to go there. So it became a journal experience. We took a moment, we all wrote down the names of the women in our bloodline, and then we asked questions, and then we journaled about it, talking about, what grandmother Alice experienced or great auntie Mary experienced, coming down to the conclusion that if we didn't talk about these stories, as I said earlier, and share these different perspectives and these different experiences, we wouldn't know exactly what to take and what to leave. So I'm a firm believer of take the meat and spit out the bone. I'm not sure if you've heard that. It's an African proverb, African American proverb. I've heard it so many times from my southern family members. But take the meat. The meat is the substance. It's the protein, right? When we're eating the meat, it's what fills us up. But leaving the bone is nothing. It's just the bone, right? So we leave the bone to the side because it doesn't give us what we need. We take the meat because the meat is the most important part. It's the part that we carry forward. It's what's going to sustain us in the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. We leave the meat, the bone, because it's not necessary. It's not a part of the story that we need to keep bringing forward. So as you are sitting here and thinking about your ancestors, the people who've come before you, in your story, in their story, I want to charge you with thinking about what they endured, learning about their story, learning about their history, learning about the experiences during the time that they were alive, right? And then were there certain things that were tender spots that we don't want to repeat in our next generation? How can we leave the bone and take the meat? Were there qualities that we want to carry forward that will allow our next generation, our world, to continue to thrive and grow? Are there things that we might want to not carry forward? Those are the things we have to think about when we're thinking about how we can be rooted in community. How can we be civically sound? It's really about being a spirit of discernment, understanding what needs to be left behind and what needs to be moving forward. So having that spirit of discernment in your storytelling, in your own personal journey forward, is going to help you on your journey to being a good ancestor. Taking the ego out, having a spirit of discernment, knowing what to take and what to leave, and that is going to root us. So I'm going to move into this direction because I want to show you guys a little statement. We are the sum total of our ancestors. We carry their DNA, we carry their dreams, failures, successes, fears, and hopes. Now, this is adapted from Alex Haley, who created the wonderful book called Roots. It was a miniseries way back when in the 70s. Some of us were not around at that time, but it was a story that was rooted on his lineage, his ancestry. Similar to how I went back into my journey of exploring my ancestry, Alex Haley did a deep dive. He's from the Maryland area, as we are. He really wanted to make sure he was learning about his culture and bringing their stories forward. But that required him to really dig into some heavy work. When we're doing ancestral work and we're going through ancestral memory, it's going to require bravery. So that's another layer of how we can be a good ancestor, being brave. Because some of the stories, as I said before, are not rooted in sugar plums and icing and cake and cookies and pie. Some of it is some harsh realities. For me, as I said, similar to Alex Haley, our families were brought here forcibly. We don't have a real tie to which tribe, which language, which culture we subscribe to. So we've had to really be our own anthropologists. We've had to be our own genealogists, archivists. We've had to really dig to find what we need in order to be able to tell these untold stories. We've had to be the griots in our family, and a griot is a storyteller. So we've had to really unearth these stories that we don't really know. and aren't just commonly afforded the opportunity to pick up a photo album or a document that dates back to 1700s. We can't see that family tree. We've had to really unearth this information. So a part of that is being brave. When I started this journey of exploring what the way forward would be, I had to go back and look for names that took me on the journey of going all the way back to finding at least one enslaved ancestor of mine. And that was hard because that's a story that I did not want to find, even though I knew this already. The harsh reality of what happened was staring me in the face. And it was tough. It was tough. But if they did not experience what they experienced, you wouldn't hear me talking to you today. So going back and exploring who they are, what their names are, even though I don't know their story, took some bravery. So in order for someone to be able to know who you are, they've got to do the same. And they might not find everything so pleasant. Maybe some, maybe there was a summer that it was a wild summer. I don't know. But all jokes aside, they're going to find some things that might not be palatable to what's going on in their generation. And that's going to take some bravery for them. But it's okay, because what's going to happen for you today, I hope, is that you lay the groundwork of making sure that they don't have to search for it so hard, that you lay some stories out for them, that you put your ego aside, as we said earlier, to be able to write down these stories, to be able to share your stories from your mouth, so that when they're looking and doing their own version of storytelling and unearthing their story on the journey, they can find yours easily without having to really sift through so much. So thinking about that, it's a twofold thing. It's brave to go back and look, but it's also an even braver task to go ahead and lay out what needs to be said for the next generation to find. So we got to be brave. I'm going to shift. So in this moment, I'm going to show you a small clip. And it comes from my documentary in reference to the show. But the reclaiming, the honoring, and the healing portion of our journey, of this story, is the most important part to me. Because it's when we get to stand in the space of the ancestor, in the here and the now. When we start to step into what an ancestor will be in this moment, we start to change the genetic makeup of the next generations coming. We get to change the outcome and the landscape for the next generations coming. So when I think about reclaiming, I think about taking up space. I like to tell my students, I like to tell anyone who's taking a class with me, take up space. Take up space. You should be here. You need to be here. This is how we root ourselves in how we are going to be good ancestors. You need to start taking up space and reclaiming and honoring and healing the space. The stories before us were the stories before us. If we've done the work of learning their history, their experiences, we can take what we need and take up space. Heal and honor. Don't dismiss. As I said, take the meat and leave the bone. Reclaim. Reclaim. So for me, it was reclaiming the ancestors that I was learning, reclaiming their stories, even if I didn't know it, just by simply calling their names, by saying Auntie Mary, great great grandma Eve, by calling their names and bringing them into the space, honoring them and allowing for my life to heal theirs, stepping into the steps of my ancestors and making my way towards being the next ancestor, making some changes where I could, making some adjustments, and maybe coming to a resolve and a healing in the spaces that I cannot change. So I'm going to show you this little clip.
Playing off the Ghanaian term Sankofa, which means to go back and fetch it, or go back and get what is at risk of being lost. We are taking this journey to not only honor them, our ancestors, but to honor ourselves, to reclaim their history, their stories, their wisdom, their knowledge, their journey, to honor good, bad, or indifferent, the pathways that they had to take, and to heal, not just for the generations coming after us, but for the generations that came before us. This is how we shape our identity, by learning from our past, in order to inform and instruct how we move forward into the future. This is their journey. This is our journey. This is the journey. This is how we heal. This is how we grow. This is the way forward.
We don't know the women we will become, but we do know the women we come from. We are physical representations of you. You have done the work. You have done the work. We will do the work. We will carry you forward. We will carry you forward. We will carry you forward.
You know our names. Never let us be forgotten. Never let our work be in vain. Who mothered you on this way? Who carried you forward? Was it an auntie, a cousin, a mama, or a grandmother? Call them. They hear you. Grammy,
Daisy,
Great Grandma
Charlotte Gross,
Aunt Mildred, Aunt
Tracy,
Cheryl,
Ella,
Aunt Geraldine,
Betty,
Jane,
Aunt Jeanette.
Mel, Bessie.
Call them.
Uncle
Grandma
Grandma
Virginia.
You know their names.
Thank you. Rosie.
Call them loud. Speak them
Thank you.
forward.
Michelle,
There we go.
Daisy,
Grandpa Carrie,
Grandma Sarah,
Madasi,
Grandma Daisy,
Mama Hurt,
Ashe.
hear you.
Mildred Scott,
Thank you. Matupwe,
Thank you.
Madasi,
Grandma,
thank you for all you've done,
Mary Scott,
mothering us along the way,
No,
thank you.
but our work
Mom
still
Blanche,
not done.
thank you.
All right. Well, all right. So, I'm bringing this quote right back up. We are the sum total of our ancestors. We carry their DNA. We carry their dreams, failures, successes, and hopes. So, as I get ready to close out, I'm going to charge you all today. Think of the people you've come from, whether they be a part of your family bloodline, whether they be a part of your broader community or your local community. How are we connected? What are their stories? How do you honor those people, those ancestors who have walked this earth before you? How do you honor them? What will you take from them? What will you learn from their stories? And what will you add onto that fabric of storytelling? You are a part of the chain in that link, but what are you going to add? How are you going to start today being a good ancestor? What will you carry forward? What will you carry forward? Think about that. Think about who they are. Think about who you are and who you are becoming, and how you will make the way forward. So I thank you all. One thing I always do before I close out, as you probably saw on the video, the calling of names, I would not be here if it wasn't for the people who walked before me. So as I prepare my journey of being a good ancestor, it wouldn't be fair without me making sure I remember the ancestors who came before me. Because one day my name will be called. And in the mix of that, they will also call the names that came before me. So I want to honor one of my ancestors who helped me before she transitioned to create this, the way forward. And that is my grandmother, Pauline Lattimore, who I sat with doing some research, recording her stories, looking at pictures, hearing who she was, and learning that I was very much similar to her, even though I wanted to fight tooth and nail to be someone different. We show up as reflections of them. I am because they are. We are because they. I am. I am because they are. We are. We are because I am. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. She just passed away in December. Um, but I call her name Pauline Lattimore. And I invite you to call the name of an ancestor who resonates with you, who's carried you forward, and whose name you will carry forward in this moment. You can say it, shout it out. Thank you, Ashe. Thank you, Ashe. Thank you, Ashe. Thank you, Ashe. It could be any. Thank you, Ashe. 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 And if you don't know the name of an ancestor, someone who's passed on in your family, this is a good opportunity to go and tell their stories. What story will you tell in the midst of you being the future ancestor? How will you carry them forward? All right, we're going to open it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille, for truly inspiring talk. We have time for some questions from the audience, and I'll just come around with the mic if you have a question.
Hey, Camille. So the question is, and it's kind of layered, but how do you determine who can be an ancestor? When children die, can they be an ancestor? And also, if first generation Americans or people that have been raised outside of their culture and possibly transracial adoptees, how are they able to create a way forward?
That's a good question. And keeping in mind that ancestors are literally just departed family members, right? So in the simplest form of ways of saying that. And when I've done this work and I sit with others who are like, I don't know the names, and they're feeling like overwhelmed because they don't know the names, right? The simplest thing is to say, those who are known and unknown, I thank you. You know, honoring whoever those ancestors may be, whether you know their names or not. I would sit down and just write out thank you to those who are known and unknown, right? And when we're talking about transracial, ancestors are ancestors. Let's be clear. Everyone in this room has an ancestor, whether you know it or not, whether it's some type of spiritual background that is different from someone else's. You have a dearly departed person in your family. Everyone has an aunt or an uncle or someone who has passed away, and they too are an ancestor. You just have to remember them. And if you don't know their names, the intention is what's important. How do we intend to honor them? Living our lives in the fullest form is the best way to do so. To show up and like I said, take up space is the best way to do so. But really, it is saying thank you. Just a simple thank you to who I know or I don't know. If I do not know your names, thank you. Thank you for the journey that you've taken. Thank you for the cross you had to bear. Thank you for the things you've endured. But thank you. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, sorry.
Does an ancestor have to be somebody who is departed, or can it just be another person in your community or bloodline who you've learned something from?
So an ancestor is someone who has departed, but an ancestor is someone who can be in your community, someone who is a part of your bloodline. So initially in the beginning of the talk, I was stating like an ancestor is someone who you honor and respect and know. Whether, and let me be clear, sometimes an ancestor is someone you do not honor or respect because we have some family members and some community members that are ancestors because they've passed away. An ancestor is a person who has transitioned, who has passed on. Now, the integrity of that person is a different story, right? So, and that probably goes back to the question that came before you in reference to, well, how do we still kind of honor them if they didn't live the best life? We say thank you. It still is a thank you for your energy and the presence that you gave on this earth. May you have the opportunity to heal, to transform, and may I do better in this world that I'm in. So again, going back to being a good ancestor, you're laying the groundwork. We're taking the meat and leaving the bone. So someone might not show up with the fullest integrity, with the best character, and they might have left us with some scraps. Let's look at if we're exploring history, we know that we've had some trials and tribulations across the globe, right? And we're currently experiencing some trials and tribulations across the globe. But how do we do better so that still those ancestors have the opportunity to heal, reclaiming, honoring, and healing?
A question online wonders, how can you best prepare yourself mentally for the journey of discovering your ancestors' stories?
Oh, that's a good question. How can you prepare yourself mentally? I would say there, for me, it is meditation. Finding what your outlet is. Making sure that you have a moment to tap back in and ground yourself. Because the journey is a journey, right? It's turbulent. It's going to be some secrets you might find, and you don't know what you don't know until you take the journey. So my suggestion would be to ground yourself. What grounds you? What is your return to center activity? For me, it's breathing, it's meditating, it's praying. When I'm having a moment where I'm going through the research and I'm experiencing these tough and challenging stories, I have to stop, take a moment, breathe, do my spiritual outlet, and then come back to the journey of discovering their stories. Yes, thank you. Oh, there's two people. All right.
Hi. It's kind of a loaded question, but how far does your ancestry that you used, how far does it go back in? Like you said before, there might be someone that we might not respect in our ancestry. Is there someone in your line that you don't respect?
All right. That's not a loaded question at all. I actually had to do this during this process. What I have discovered in this unearthing of ancestry, I have gotten back to as far as 18, I think it was 1870s, through the 1870s all the way up to now. I discovered that I have family that was in Washington, D.C., that was in North Carolina and South Carolina. It was an experience, right? But I also had to discover in this wonderful journey, there were some ancestors, not just one, some, that were not quite fair in learning these stories. And I'm appreciative, and that's why I said we have to share our stories, right? Because I didn't know that a grandparent of mine was not quite kind. I wasn't aware. I just thought that this person was just my grandparent, wonderful. But I discovered that he was not quite a kind person. And he wasn't kind to the people I loved. And it was hard because I loved that person. But when I found out what that person's story was, I had to resolve in my mind that I had to find some way to heal. At first, it was like, nah, I don't have to heal that. There's no reason. They are a blood relative, so to speak. That just left it at that. But then I realized the work that I'm doing for myself is to set the tone for the next generation. So I had to make some amends and some healing moments with this ancestor by saying, I thank you for the presence and the energy that you were able to give and the time that you could give it. I thank you for the ways in which you could show up. And I hope that you heal in the ways you couldn't. Yeah. That threw some questions out the water.
I'm really interested in any practices that you might suggest for connecting ethically with future generations, which may feel unfamiliar in a different way from how ancestors feel to us.
So ways in which you can connect to future generations. So far. Okay. And that is a thing, right? Right now we're dealing with that as I have a child who is a teenager, and I am constantly reminding myself of the ways in which my grandmother showed up, the traditions, the sayings, because I want him to know. Because it was kind of skipped over. My grandmother would say, don't put the hat on the bed. Don't open an umbrella in the house. Make sure you don't put your purse on the floor so that you don't go broke. These little tools that were in African American cultures, ways for us to survive. These tips and tools were our survival. These stories, these taboos, they kept us on the straight and narrow. However, somewhere along the way, a generation said, we're not going to listen to them. We don't need that. We good. We're fine. We're not going to. No, you can put the umbrella up in the house. You can put the hat on the bed. You can walk on the other side of the street. You can step on that crack because your mother's back is not going to break. You understand what I'm saying? That was the things, right? We had that divide. It was like, well, that was just something grandma said. That was just something grandma said. And then it became a generation of young adults who were disconnected to these very things that kept bloodlines safe, that kept stories being told and shared. And for me, it is reclaiming and honoring so that we can heal. We got to reclaim it. So I do tell my son, don't put the hat on the bed. Please pick up your book bag off the floor. Do not open that umbrella. Why'd you put? Pick that salt up and throw it over your left shoulder, please and thank you. You know, I'm telling him all these things. It may seem silly, but I know that that is the way that we continue to honor tradition and we root ourselves in the ways of community. Because what I know is I can say in a room full of other people who might be of different ethnicities, do not do this. And somehow there is a variation of that in their culture. Whether I say, do not open an umbrella in the house or the table salt, you got to chuck it over your left shoulder, there is some variation of that in their culture. And it's because someone told them about that. Someone shared about the black eyed peas and cornbread and collard greens on New Year's Eve that you have to make in order to get prosperity and good luck, right? Someone is continuing that. So therefore, our stores do not have collard greens and black eyed peas on New Year's Eve because someone is continuing that journey and someone is making sure that we have a rooted tradition. Whether I live in Baltimore or New York or North Carolina, if I say, get your collard greens, I'ma get it, somebody knows. And it's a community, it's a shared thing. It's a shared story. It's a shared tradition. So we have to continue to share these things. It doesn't die with a generation. Someone has to pick up the mantle and bring it forward. It's a part of being the good ancestor that we are hoping to be for the future generation. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hello. Um, as a dancer for your way forward, how did you choose what stories to tell?
Oh, wonderful. So, as I said, this story is rooted in the African American, specifically Black women stories, right? I'm coming from my bloodline, the women of my bloodline, and as I was sitting and doing the research, I wanted to know like what shapes identity. Like I was really tied to the idea of identity. Like why am I who I am, right? What has established who I am today? So I thought about the ways in which I show up. I'm joyful. The ways in which I've seen other Black women, yes, polka dots, yes, orange sweater, yes, yes, yes. The ways in which Black women show up is just joy. It does, period. It don't matter if I don't know you, but if I see you in the store and that hat in the back looks cute, girl, yes, it's a shared joy. It's a joy, and you could have the most down day of all. But if a Black woman walks in the room and says, "Oh, I like them earrings," sis, you like, "Oh, well, all right, well, all right." You, it's giving. Oh, my dress is giving. See what I'm saying? It's just the joy. So that was one of the stories I wanted to tell, the joy of Black women, because honestly, as I was growing up, there was limited amounts of joy. Joy was attached to other people. Black women would experience joy through making sure their child was graduating. I am joyful because you graduated. I am joyful because you got that good job. I am joyful that my children have a roof. But where was the joy they were experiencing? That's the story I wanted to tell. Then there was the story of spirit, because as we shared, don't open that umbrella in your house, don't put your traverse. Those things, unfortunately, because of the disconnect that we have with our generation, are also a part of spirit. Someone's dreaming of fishing. We're dreaming of fish. This is an African proverb in my mind. I call it an African proverb, an African American proverb. Someone's dreaming of fish means someone in your family is about to have a baby. But these are the ways in which we have this spiritual knowing. So women are always known to have this inclination, this intuition. As women, we just have this way of knowing. Oh, I know you came in late last night. Just how did you know? I know you snuck in. Child, go. I know you didn't wash them armpits, girl. I know all the things. All the things you know a mother knows about you without you even saying a word. Mothers just know something instinctually about you. That's spirit. So I wanted to honor that way in which women, specifically for me, black women, just could say, I know you didn't do your homework. Please go back in that room. Like, you just walked in the room for work, man. What? How? 6 cents. That's the spirit, right? Right? So that I wanted to honor that story. And then we got into layers of conversations of if we have joy, there's got to be some opposite. There's got to be some pain. So I was really thinking about the experiences of black women as a whole. And the stories I wanted to tell really were coming out of their experiences. So I hope that helps in answering. There's a lot of hands.
We'll make this, oh, okay, we've lost 2 questions.
Oh, that's two.
You mentioned healing forward and back, and so I'm curious if you could unpack more what you mean by healing backwards.
Sure. So healing backwards, and it kind of ties to young man's question about having some ancestors that might not have been some interest. They might have been interesting characters. I'll say that. When we talk about healing backwards, we always talk about making sure we have the generation before us together and down packed. But in order for us to do that, we have to unpack some things that were brought to us before we even got here. We all know about the idea of generational trauma and the way that it exists. But on a cellular level, and as I shared that statement from Alex Haley, it is imprinted on your DNA. You, every time you don't check something that is unhealed, it resonates. The body keeps the score. I hope you have read that book. If you haven't, please go ahead and do so. The body remembers. And I say that because, scientifically speaking, women who are born biologically women are born with all the eggs they will ever have, right? So that means my grandmother was carrying me and my mother at the same time, my sibling and my 2 siblings, because we have all the eggs we are ever to have in life. So the minute my mother, I'll just say this, the minute my mother found out she was having a girl, she was carrying her grandchildren already. So that means whatever is imprinted on me in the womb was imprinted on her in her mother's womb. So if there are things that are unchecked, they get carried forward, and specifically through women because we have the eggs. So therefore, we are bringing this forward and forward. And I'm not going to exclude our gentleman. That also is tied into you as well. So combine one person with the other, we're carrying forward trauma on trauma on trauma, unhealed and unchecked. So how do we stop that? We've got to stop it here so that in our cellular makeup, we are currently repairing the damage. It's almost like that wound that you get a gash on your hand. If you don't heal it, it'll get a scab and the scab will just be there. But you can pick the scab and it'll open right up again, right? You need to heal it properly the first time so it doesn't get carried on the next time, right? So when I say healing generations back, you got to do that work first before you step into, okay, next generation, come on down, because that's not being a good ancestor. You're just carrying on the next layer of trauma. You've got to cut it off right there. Do the work of healing yourself, which in turn heals the generations that came before you. So being the good ancestor is being brave, taking that ego out of it, and stepping into the space where you say, okay, I got to talk about this. I got to really process this and tell the full story so the next generation has full context and can decide what meat they're taking and what bone they're leaving. I think that was that last question, I think.
It's kind of just general. I danced my whole life as well. Well, probably I'll be 26. I danced for like 18 years. So I'm very similar in with like telling stories with the dance that you're doing in production, and I just am wondering, like, how long did you dance for, and why? When did you want to change it into telling your family story, if that makes sense?
Good question. So I have, shout out to my mama, I have been dancing since I was 3, literally. And I started dancing because I saw my sister dancing. And, you always want to be like your big sister. So my sister was dancing. She didn't want to dance anymore, but I wanted to continue dancing. So then it became, now I'm in my 40s and I've been dancing since. Got a master's in dance, got an undergrad in dance. Dance is my thing. As you probably heard from my bio introduction, I am an advocate for the arts. But this has been the first time I have told my story through my art. I'm usually sharing the stories of social justice. I'm usually sharing the stories of social climate change, environmental justice. I'm always centering community in my work in reference to what I do. I've never really centered my own storytelling in my work. So it really was an idea of, well, how am I here? Like, why am I here? I really was really enthralled in the idea of, again, identity. Like, I went so long thinking, you are the dancer. But was that my identity? Like, was it just a portion of my identity? And who else in my family is an artist? Who else was doing this creative work? And that led me on this journey, right? So I really wanted to make sure that in this moment, using my art was the way of centering and honoring the work of those who've come before me. And it's not just my personal ancestors, but it was my community ancestors. So Rod Rogers is one of the dance ancestors I could think of. Catherine Dunham is one of the ancestors I think of, who was an anthropologist who really studied why people do what they do. So I started to change it from just dancing for dance sake to why are we dancing? What are the stories? And as an artist, it is your opportunity to tell unheard stories. And it should really be your job because you get to reflect your art to people in a way that they can grasp. I couldn't just talk about ancestry without you having something to really connect to. Art has a really like defining way of bringing you into problems in a more palatable. I don't want to say palatable like it's wrong, but everyone in this world is different type of learners. We don't just grasp it as it's being told to us directly. Some people need to feel it. They need the tactile experience of it. So that art, feeling the textures, right? Some people need to see it visually. So seeing dance, hearing the acting, right? The auditory version of it, or hearing the music version of it, right? There is a way that art can amplify the message. So as an artist, it is your duty to reflect the times. And for me, I was hearing this one message, and I'll quickly sum it up. When there was a lot of protests happening, I heard this one message of, we are not our ancestors. Have we heard that? I heard that, boo. Yes, I heard that. And I said, we are not our ancestors. What does that mean? We are not our ancestors. What does, and I said, oh, so we're disconnected because we don't know their stories. If we knew their stories, we'd have a clear understanding that we are our ancestors. And through this process, I realized, like I said, oh yeah, you are Pauline's grandchild. You are Margaret's grandchild. You are Mildred's great niece. You are Marvin's granddaughter. You are an amalgamation of all of these people. So you can never say out your mouth, you are not your ancestors. Because if you discover them and you unearth their stories, you'll realize you too are your ancestors. So it is job to tell the stories when others cannot. So I use my art to do that. Yes.
Thank you, Camille Weanquoi, for a fascinating perspective on storytelling. Thank you, audience, for your great questions. Please join us tomorrow night when Camille W. Dance and Company performs The Way Forward, 7 o'clock at the Fine Arts Center. I'm very excited for that performance after hearing you talk today. Thank you.